This is a map of the 10 states with the highest average daycare costs. Minnesota is number 6 with an average cost of nearly $13,000 a year. It's the only state in the Midwest that is in the top 10 according to the World Population Review. The legislature is now considering increasing the reimbursements for childcare so that families making up to $174,000 would qualify for childcare reimbursements. Critics say that amounts to government subsidies for the rich.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. Does a family earning up to $174,000 a year deserve a state subsidy for their daycare bills? Democrats in the state legislature are proposing raising the cutoff to receive state daycare subsidies from the current $60,000 family income level to including families making up to $174,000. Tonight, we will look at the numbers and talk to a family that is in that higher income bracket that is facing $45,000 in childcare bills. The mom is a teacher, the dad has taken a second job as a waiter. Everyone agrees this system is broken. We'll talk to one of the DFL co-sponsors of the bill that would put $500 million more of state money into expanding who gets these subsidies. And we'll talk to a Republican representative who says the real problem is the lack of providers driven away by Minnesota's excessive daycare regulations. First, let's talk to that mom of the family facing $45,000 a year in daycare bills. Joining us right now, Suzanne Temple-Gumm. She is a high school teacher. She is a mom of 2. She is a wife. She's expecting, and she's got some big daycare bills. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Tell us about your family and why your daycare bill is about to really go up.
Yeah, so currently I have 2 boys. I have Ben, who is going to be 4 next week. I have Charlie that just turned 2 last month. And then I am due at the beginning of May with a little girl. And because none of them are old enough to go to kindergarten, and my husband and I both work full time, we will have 3 in daycare next school year.
Okay. What are you currently paying right now for daycare?
So currently with 2 in daycare, it is about $2,900 a month.
Okay. And obviously this is going to be infant daycare that you're looking at next fall when you go back to teaching. How much is that?
We found a home daycare that is $240 a week. It's actually the least expensive of the places our kids are going because it is a home daycare. But when we put it all together, with all 3 of them in daycare next year, we're looking at $45,384 for the year.
That is just $45,384. I mean, that's a staggering figure. I mean, how are you dealing with that? It sounds like just barely.
Yeah, I mean, we are making it work. And of course, before we decided to have the third, we weighed the costs. But my husband has to work a 3rd job. And that 3rd job pretty much exclusively covers the daycare costs, which is really hard to be working 2 jobs.
To be clear, so you've got your job, he has a job with a top company, a good job, and then he's taken the 3rd family job, which is he's a server, right?
Yeah.
So he has taken a job as a server to pay for your daycare.
Yes. Yeah.
What is that like?
Well, it's really hard on everyone in our family. I mean, a lot of times I come home from teaching all day and end up kind of solo parenting 2 little kids while currently 8 months pregnant. He misses out on a lot of family time. Our weekends are when he's at work, so we don't often get to do things as a family. It's hard to even figure out when to go grocery shopping, just little things, because oftentimes when I'm home, he's at work. And so it's exhausting, and I don't believe it should be this hard.
I know that you have made your point to the legislature. Why did you feel, and you're willing to do this, which we so appreciate, why did you feel it was important to go public?
Well, we are an average family. We're two hardworking, college-educated, able-bodied people who ultimately have a lot of advantages and privileges. And it's this hard for us. I can't imagine how difficult it is for people who don't have the privileges and advantages that we have. And it just doesn't feel like the system is working as it should. For if it's this hard for a hardworking, well-educated family that has two solid careers plus a third job, the system's not working. And I really hope that something can be done to help hardworking families like ours.
There is also the factor of those people who make too much to be considered really low income, which you folks would be making too much with the kinds of jobs that you have. And yet you're certainly not, you're nowhere near wealthy. This bill would actually provide subsidies for people that that are making the kind of income, six-figure family income that your family is making. Is that something, are you a group that needs help?
Yeah, and anything helps. Um, it is our dream to get away from my husband having to work the extra job. And it would be a game changer for our family. And while the amount that the bill proposes wouldn't be enough to do that for us, it would help push us toward that. And every little bit helps.
It would be about $100 a month, as I understand it, and per child, possibly. I mean, which is that's the money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What would you say to people who say, "Well, Suzanne, why don't you quit your job and you just stay home and take care of the kids?"
Well, we've talked about it. We've looked at the numbers and it doesn't make fiscal sense for us because we have other bills. I mean, childcare is going to be 30% of our monthly bills, but that still leaves 70% of other bills. And neither of our jobs makes enough money on its own to cover that other 70%, even once we consider childcare out of it. Plus, there's just the fact that like we both really like our jobs. We're fulfilled in our jobs. I being a teacher is a huge part of my identity. And while I love my kids, I love my family, they are my priority. I would not be who I am if I were to leave teaching. And so I don't feel that that's a choice that people should have to make.
On the one hand, people would look at you and your family and say, you are the American dream. You've got, a wonderful family, a wonderful career. Your husband has a great career, but yet it's falling short, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't even know what this means, but we've done everything right. I mean, we're both we went to college, we have the house, we live in the suburbs, like all the things. And it's still harder to find what we see in order for us to really truly live the life that we would like to, which might even just mean like my husband gets to be home on Saturday with his families, or his family.
What would you like people to know, and what should be done? Do you have any
Well,
suggestions?
I just don't think it should be this hard. And I believe that people should understand that that we are an average hardworking family who works really hard to make wise choices, and we're not asking for a handout. We're asking for some help in a system that is untenable for middle class families, and to provide some support in that regard.
Well, Suzanne, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your story. And
Yeah,
good luck with the baby.
thank you. We're excited.
Up next, Eden Prairie Representative Carlie Kotyza-Witthuhn, who is a mother of four herself and is one of those proposing expanding child care subsidies. Joining us right now, Representative Carlie Kotyza-Witthuhn. She is from Eden Prairie, and she's a mom of four, ranging in age from, you said, 3.5 to 10.
That is
You're,
correct.
you're a busy representative.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We've got a full house and full schedules.
Right. And I was asking you before, when you're not a legislator, you are a full-time mom.
That's correct. Yeah. we have been able to make the choice for me to stay home outside of the legislative session, which is really truly a blessing for me. But I know so many parents are having to make that choice, not on whether or not they want to, but whether or not they have to stay home because the income just doesn't line up.
Well, let's talk about that because I know that you're one of the co-sponsors of a bill that would raise the threshold for reimbursements to $174,000 up to $180,000. I've heard that estimate. That sounds like so much money. In reality, how do you explain it to people when you're saying it's not that much money if you have several children?
Absolutely. I think, so right now our current subsidies support families who are earning about $60,000 a year and above that annual income threshold. It's just a cliff. So, people aren't qualified for any sort of state support. And we know people right across that, if they're making $65,000 a year and they're spending what the average infant care is about $17,000 a year here in Minnesota. And the amount varies across the state, but we know that middle income families are still really struggling. Folks are paying for school. I mean, they're paying for college loans. They're often have mortgage or high rent payment. But these childcare costs are sometimes costing families up to twice their mortgage payment, which is really crazy when you think about it.
And you mentioned college loans because I think this is an important piece because all of the people I've talked to with young children, they may be solidly middle class, upper middle class, but they all still have their college loans. That's something that your generation really continues to deal with, and you feel that should be factored in.
Yeah, millennial parents are really feeling this pinch because many of us, kind of graduated at the start of the Great Recession and didn't have the smoothest start to our careers. And then of course we've faced COVID as we were moving into the parenting stage of life, and it's just kind of been one thing after the other. And to really find that balance between a stable income and being able to care for our children or make sure that they're in a trusted, safe place being cared for while we go back into the workforce has been really a struggle.
Let me ask you, Republicans say this is way too much money, and the problem with Minnesota, the reason daycare costs and childcare costs are so high is because of excessive regulation. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think, over the past few years that I've been in office, first elected in 2018, and we've done a lot toward modernizing our regulatory structure for childcare. I mean, we're always listening to providers and family childcare providers about what their feedback looks like and kind of how do we ease potential areas of difficulty and challenge. But also, at the end of the day, everybody wants kids to be in a safe environment. So it's a delicate balance. When you look across the country, though, in terms of really vast, different regulatory environments, anywhere from Wisconsin to southern states who may be more Republican-led, they have the same difficulties in childcare pricing, but also availability. So I think that it just is such a hard puzzle to solve. And as conversations continue at the federal level, the time for us to do something for Minnesota families is now.
So you sounds like you don't go along with this cutting down on regulation could probably result in more people being daycare providers or help the affordability.
Sure. I think that to some extent, there are things that we can do to ensure that childcare providers feel less of a pinch when it comes to reporting or these sorts of things. And we're gathering that feedback constantly. But I don't think that regulation is the sole challenge when it comes to affordability in the industry, because we know these providers are not even making a living wage in most circumstances.
All right, I'm sure you are very busy with children's activities. When you go back to Eden Prairie, when you're in your neighborhood, when you're at your kids' activities, does this subject, the cost of daycare, come up? How much does it come up? And what is the feedback you're getting on this proposal?
Well, thank you for that question. And I actually participate on our early childhood PTO here in Eden Prairie. Is something that I've been a part of for the last 5 years or so when our daughter was 2 and continuing on. So through early childhood family education classes, I'm talking to folks about this issue a lot. And as as my district continues to change and there are folks moving in who, want a bigger yard to raise their family, they hear really great things about our school system in Eden Prairie, and they come out to the suburbs, which is fantastic. But we know that this is something that no matter if people are in the metro or the suburbs or in rural Minnesota, they are struggling to pay for the cost of care. And again, I think that does go back to some of the challenges that we have with affordable housing, missing middle housing opportunities in a variety of neighborhoods, right? And then also folks being able to pay for their student loans, but potentially go back to school to retool their school skill set and re-enter the workforce.
Representative Carlie Kotyza-Witthuhn, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, I really appreciate you bringing continued attention to this issue that so many families are struggling with.
Up next, Representative Neu Brindley, a leading Republican voice on this issue, who is also a mother of 5. Joining us right now is Representative Neu Brindley from North Branch, and she has been an outspoken conservative voice on the crisis in daycare. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Now, we were chatting before we recorded, and you said the system is broken. I think everybody seems to agree with that. What are your thoughts about the proposals that would include credits for families that make up to $180,000 a year? Your thoughts on that and what you think should be done about the system, as I might say, a mother of 5.
Yes, that's an important piece, right?
Right.
Well, I'll be honest. I have some real frustration. There are things that we could do from a regulatory perspective. There are things that we could do to incentivize daycare providers, because right now a big problem is that we don't have enough providers, and simply providing this credit does not magically create providers. So I'm not sure that we're really solving the problem, but I'll be honest, I have some real frustration with the fact that my Democrat colleagues had the largest budget surplus in state history last year. $17.5 billion. In addition, they increased taxes, the largest tax increase in state history. They had $27.5 billion to work with, and this wasn't on the table. We have a daycare
You mean the
crisis.
daycare crisis? Because they'll say that there were things they did. You think they should have done more to address the daycare crisis?
Listen, there were problems that could, with as much money as we had to work with in the last budget, we actually could have solved some problems. But we didn't.
Tell me
And
about
instead, we're coming back now with these very expensive proposals. And I know my Democrat colleagues and the governor are trying to rebrand a deficit as a structural imbalance. But a structural imbalance is a deficit. It means we don't have enough money. Right now, we know that in our next budget cycle, we already don't have enough money. We can't spend it. We cannot spend this money.
Let me go back to your issue about incentivizing daycare, because you're saying we can give all the subsidies we want, but if we don't have enough daycare providers, that's a problem. What would you like to see? Because a subsidy inherently means some kind of taxpayers' money going to help those daycare providers. What do you think should be done?
Well, but again, it may help the providers, but right now the providers don't exist. And we saw a real exodus of daycare providers several years ago following this sort of scheme to try to unionize private daycare providers. And that it sort of came to a head after that. The bureaucracy around daycare providers and the odious regulations around daycare providers. Now,
So
let's be
you
clear.
think less regulation would enhance? What are some of the regulations that you think could be done away with or modified that would encourage more people to have a daycare?
Sure. So first of all, let's be clear. We are talking about caring for our children. So we must make sure that we maintain any regulations regarding the safety of our children. We absolutely must make sure that we are regulating the daycare industry to ensure the safety of our children. However, I mean, we heard stories of providers leaving the field because they were getting dinged for things like, a home daycare provider. There was literally a stick in the backyard. that has fallen from a tree. I mean, I don't know. I've got a yard. There's sticks in my yard. I mean, it just this kind of ticky-tacky nonsense does not help our situation. So certainly,
Well,
I think that
you're saying these regulations, I'm sure somebody doesn't get disqualified from being a daycare provider, but it's a ding they have to address. There might be a penalty, and they'll say, what's the point? It's not worth it. Do you think some of these regulations are actually forcing people out of the daycare business?
they did. We know they did. We lost a lot of providers. Again, this is prior to the pandemic. Even this was a number of years ago. We lost a lot of providers. And so we know that happened. We know it happened, and we've got to figure out just subsidizing families. Yes, the cost of daycare is high, although I would also argue $180,000 a year salary is also very high. And the vast majority of Minnesotans are not making anywhere near that salary. And that probably is a little bit of an imbalance as well. It probably, well, yes, of course, we would all love to have some of the burden, financial burden lifted. I think most Minnesotans would say that if you're making $180,000 a year, it's okay if you have to pay your expenses. I think most Minnesotans would agree with that. I certainly don't make anywhere near $180,000 a year. The vast majority of Minnesotans don't. That's just I heard a phrase recently about luxury beliefs, and my goodness, is it a luxury belief to think that $180,000 a year is not enough to afford, might not always be enough to afford the lives that we want, but certainly it is enough to provide for your family. And so we need to think a little bit differently. We need to care for those who need the care. And make sure that we are providing resources for families that absolutely need that support. We can't leave them behind.
Thank you so much for your input. We really appreciate it. We'll be following this debate. Of course, your side's in the minority at the Capitol. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yes. Thank you, Esme.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please feel free to email me with comments or suggestions. The show streams every Wednesday and Thursday night at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. on CBS News Minnesota. On Friday, the show posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.